courageous and principled stand leader Ram Madhavji for coming here despite all the constraints from the ruling party. I remember His Holiness Dalai Lama when he met Atal Bihari Vajpayee when he was the ruling party. He said, "I wish you were in the opposition party because you spoke more eloquently about Tibet than being in the ruling party." So to someone from the ruling party to come and speak on the issue, a very sensitive issue about the three T, Tibet, Tiananmen, and Taiwan, is very courageous. So I appreciate that. As you can see, I'm sweating a bit. I'm under a bit of a cloud because just 2 days ago I spoke in New York in front of the United Nations to 5,000 Tibetans and friends. So it was -degree, and then the environment was not so to the temper of a rally. And then each speaker was going on speaking, and they could not raise the temper of the rally. So then, as a Sikyong of CTA who follows ahimsa, non-violence, and dialogue in His Holiness Dalai Lama, I am not supposed to increase the temperature. I'm supposed to tone down the temperature, but the temperature was so cold and rally's environment was much colder. I just felt I have to bring out my Tibetan youth activist days and speak forcefully and loudly. I spoke so loudly that I lost my voice and I got sore throat. So, and then this morning, as I was going through the topic, it says Tibet holds the key to Beijing. I was puzzled with this topic. Suddenly I realized that Professor Emil Sondhi had written an article about it. And I was reading it, and Madam Sondhi has sent a suggestion that I should talk about my trip to Australia, New Zealand, and Nordic countries and how it relates to Tibet and China. So as it is, I'm under cloud, fever is high, cold, mix all that direction and suggestions. Now I got a little lost. And then my wife told me to eat good momo and drink lots of chicken soup. I had so much that I'm sweating now, so I took off my sweater, as you might have noticed. But this issue is very important, and two of the eloquent speakers have made their case very, very clearly. Then I will try to combine all this and more if my fever and cold can hold. Now, Tibet holds the key to Beijing. How is it so? I think perhaps we should start with the recent development in China. And that answers many of the questions, and particularly what, I would say prophetic Professor Emil Sondhi wrote about Tibet on, India-China relationship. In the recent 19th plenum, Xi Jinping, in his 3 hours, 25 minutes speech, essentially he said, socialism is Chinese characteristic in new era. That will be the mantra. So what is socialism with Chinese characteristic? Essentially, no liberal democracy, no freedom of speech, no rule of law, essentially one-party rule. Now, what is the new era? New era is the international frontier. Because the Mao Zedong era, we all know, is the unification of China. Deng Xiaoping era is to make China rich. They have made rich. Now the new era, the Xi Jinping era, is to take that socialism with Chinese characteristic to the international frontier. Hence, I've been conveying this message to all the capitals that I travel to. I said, whether you like it or not, we all have only one choice. There are no choices. Either you transform China into liberal democracy or a Buddhist-based democracy, or China transform you. There is no choice. They are coming. That's their mantra. At least Deng Xiaoping had the decency to say that, democracy will come in China in 50 years. Wen Jiabao had the decency to say that democracy is inevitable. Now Xi Jinping is saying no democracy. Socialism with Chinese characteristic. So it's coming to India. It's coming to all the neighboring countries. Hence, when I went to Denmark, they said, no, it's not coming to Denmark. Denmark will always be democratic. Norway said the same thing. Sweden said the same thing. Australia said the same thing. I proved them wrong. And this is how. Denmark spoke very strongly about human rights in China and Tibet in 1998, unilaterally, in Geneva. They were singled out and punished in the sense they were isolated, relationship were cut off until 2008. And 2008, they made a deal. So in Denmark, there's a document called, is very interesting, verbal note. It said verbally, but there is a note. Essentially, the Chinese government said verbally, the Danish foreign minister took a note of it. In English, it's never translated in Danish, never shown in Danish, never published in Danish. And then that document was shown, and the government accepted and called all the opposition leaders related to foreign policy in one room and said, this is what we have to agree if you want to normalize relationship with Beijing. They all read, now English is not the first language, now they have read in English. So they read it, and most of them found it, okay, it's acceptable because it talks about how great China was and how Denmark great was and what kind of relationship they had. We should continue the relationship. It looked all exotic and good. Except for one statesman, a very sharp guy, Mr. Sorensen. He noted and said, this one line, everything is all right. It's about how Danish food is good, Chinese food is good, and everything all right. And then there's one line which says that we oppose the independence of Tibet. So why do we have to write that line? Can't we take this out? And then the foreign minister said, that's the only line we cannot take out. Rest you can amend. And then they all thought, what the heck is one line? It's just one piece of paper. You sign it, and then we'll normalize our relationship. They signed it. Now, since 2008, what happened? Because they signed it, we opposed independence of Tibet. It was never interpreted to Beijing, to Denmark, what it means. Now, each time Tibet issue was raised, interpretation expanded. First, monarch of Denmark or the prime minister of Denmark cannot meet his Holiness Dalai Lama. Okay, tick. Next time, foreign minister cannot meet his Holiness Dalai Lama. Next time, speaker cannot host his Holiness Dalai Lama. Next time, or even if His Holiness is hosted in the parliament, it has to go through the back door. And recently, the Danish delegation, member of parliament delegation, went to Beijing as a member of a high-level delegation. At the end, a mid-level bureaucrat, Chinese bureaucrat, wagged his finger and told them, Sikyong is coming. I was coming to Denmark. You dare not meet him. Why? You opposed independence of Tibet. They felt humiliated. And they said, we are going to meet with you and we will take a photograph, we'll put it on our Facebook. Because this is not what we signed. We just thought it's one line. We never thought all these things will follow. Then I went to Norway, Oslo. Same story. In Oslo, the Nobel Peace Committee gave Nobel Peace Prize to Liu Xiaobo, the Chinese Nobel Peace Laureate. And then tundra, frozen relationship. And then there was a lot of debate. 3 years ago I went there. There was a lot of debate. We should renew or normalize our relationship with China because why? We can sell more salmon to China because Norway doesn't need any money. Okay, they have 5 to 10% trade surplus every year. The budget surplus every year. They have oil. Their foreign reserve is more than $1 trillion. They don't need any Chinese money. But they want to normalize relationship with China because I said, why? Because we want to be back in the game, and game is Beijing. I said, what do you mean back in the game, What do you think you will gain by, you're having your office in Beijing? Oh, we will have a presence. I mean, the whole thing has flipped. To have an office in Beijing is a prestige issue. And so you are compromising your principle by doing that. And Norway went to the extent, can you imagine to the extent, that when Liu Xiaobo was released recently, he has terminal cancer. He was dying. And it was German doctors who said, we will take him to Germany and, provide medical treatment. Norwegian Prime Minister didn't say a word because she was on vacation. I mean, Norway, essentially Nobel Peace Committee, gave the Nobel Peace Prize to him. And he's terminally ill. There's no ownership. Of course, Nobel Peace Committee issued a statement, but the Norwegian government was silent. And I raised this issue in Norway. I said, the next time when a Nobel Peace Laureate gets the prize, he will come and take the prize and take $1 million, but the back of his mind or her mind will say, when push comes to shove, Norway will not be there. But I'll take the prize and the money and leave. I said, why are you compromising your principles and values? Because why? China had made them sign a document, another document, where it says Norway will respect core issues of China. What are the core issues? Not defined. Now we know what are the core issues. Tibet, Prime Minister. Now core issues includes also now Taiwan and Tiananmen. Denmark said only Tibet. Norway has some core issues. So then and when I went to Sweden, they said we are yet to sign a free trade agreement. Hence we have not signed these conditions. And I said it's coming. Either you transform China or China is transforming you. They said no. They will be never be able to transform us. I said you're already transforming. You have given concession on Tibet. You have given concession on Taiwan. You have given concession of Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia. Then it will be expanded to human rights, environmental rights, all other issues. So hence India also, it's a reality. China is coming. It has come all the way to Doklam. It has already come to Nepal. We know just had election recently. Nepal is the only Hindu country in the world. It has no pro-China government there. And I went to Australia. Same thing. Interesting thing about Australia is that 3 years ago, I was there. The debate in Australia was, at least in the media, was whether the then foreign minister would meet with me or not. It was the debate. And I said, well, if he wants to meet, I will meet, but I have no objection. But media speculation, that was the question I was asked. So when I entered the building of Australian Parliament, I took the elevator. Up the floor I went, door open, who entered? The foreign minister of Australia. I thought that was a karmic meeting. Formally it was not happening, but here he comes. Then deliberately I didn't shake his hand. You know, that will be shaking a hand. Obviously, as a Tibetan, I will say it's shaking a hand with a peaceful guy, but it could be shaking a hand with the devils, you know, in terms of major concessions. This time when I went to Australia, what has happened to the Australian foreign minister? He has become the highest paid consultant to the Chinese government. Now, the trade minister of Australia also. Again, there was a controversial deal. He signed it. Now he's become the director of the trade deal. So this is what you see happening everywhere. You go. That they make a concession on business everywhere. Now Australia has this movie called Four Corners. It's a documentary produced by ABC Australian Television. If you watch that, you will see the influence of Chinese government in Australia. It has penetrated everything. It's not just business. It's not just academia. It's not just politics. Everywhere. Now there's this issue that Chinese businessmen are being huge tract of land. And all the provincial government are competing to get Chinese business. Now soon they realize that they have bought huge tract of land to grow products like vegetables or animal meat, all kinds. Then suddenly they realize that all the transportation, all the cold storage, where you put all the food, is also bought by Chinese. And all the local transportation are also bought by Chinese company. And the export from Australia to China, all the ship and the export is also bought by Chinese. They have hired best lawyers, best accountant, and they have paid consultants in the form of former ministers. And the whole chain. And the Australian provinces are nervous as to what is happening. And then in academia, can you imagine Western countries take pride in saying academic freedom, objectivity of the academic freedom, intellectual space is very, very important, very sacred. It's constitutionally guaranteed. Now in Australian university, a professor of Indian descent mentioned Taiwan in the class. Chinese students objected and complained to the university. What did university do? University fired that professor. Why? For Australia, education is the third highest source of income. And the largest number of foreign students are Chinese. Now, instead of Chinese students transforming their mind, learning from Western culture, Australian culture or Norwegian culture, American culture, they are influencing the academia of the West. Now we know, as well-known print publications, many publications, major publications have stopped publishing articles on Tibet, Tiananmen, all sensitive issues. They're self-censoring themselves. So you can clearly see the world is transforming more like China then we all are trying to transform China. So hence we have no choice. India has no choice. And in this context, as I said, Professor Emil Sondhi was prophetic. From the very beginning, he said Tibet is the core issue between India and China relationship. Had India taken a stand in 1950s and 60s, even the Ram Madhavji said, what happened 60 years cannot be addressed now, but had India and all the neighboring countries taken a stand on Tibet, China could have, if not been pushed back, could have paused. No one took a stand and let China come to the border of India. Now we have 3,500 kilometers long border, which never existed between India and Tibet. Now it's India and China, all the border areas, right here. Now they're in Doklam, they're entering Doklam. They're entering Nepal, they're entering Bangladesh, they're entering everywhere because we let them come to Tibet. And for decades, Emil Sondhi has said, even now they have entered. Least India could do is declare Tibet as a zone of peace. Let us restore its status as a buffer zone. At least denuclearize Tibet. De-arm Tibetan region. And no one spoke. No one came out in support of Professor Emil Sondhi. At least if those agreements were done, at least those conditions were put there on the table. But you have occupied Tibet, we accept that, but it has to be zone of peace, it has to be buffer zone, there should be no nuclear warm, there should be no arms. Then 1,800 Chinese troops won't be standing in Doklam as we speak today. They have just declared that they will sit through even the winter. They would not even come to Nepal. So hence Tibet is the litmus test. And hence Tibet holds the key to Beijing. In that sense, it's right. Everywhere. If you are for human rights, if you are for democracy, if you are for justice, if you are for ahimsa, if you are for non-violence, if you are for dialogue, you ought to support the issue of Tibet. If you don't support, that's what I said in front of the UN, that's what I say everywhere. If you don't support, you are not only not supporting Tibet, you are in fact opposing ahimsa, you're opposing non-violence, you're opposing dialogue, you're opposing human rights, you're opposing democracy. Because there's no choice. China is coming and it's penetrating every aspect of your society. So hence, it's not too late. Hence, Tibet could be the catalyst to bring changes inside China as well. And if you want to bring changes inside China, which horse or which lion you want to ride? I think it's the Tibetan one. That's what Professor Emil Sondhi has said all along. India should also declare Tibet as one of the core issues like China declares. And it should be on the table when you have any dialogue on India-China relationship. Unless you put it on the table, it's not an issue. And then you can address the issue of Tibet. Now, recently, the Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh and the whole of Assam is nervous because suddenly this dark, thick, cement-like water liquid is flowing through the Brahmaputra River, and in many suspects, a major construction is going on to divert the Brahmaputra River towards other parts of China, and it's receding every year. And Tibet is the water tower of Asia. 10 major rivers of Asia: Indus, Satluj, Brahmaputra, Yangtze, Yellow, Irrawaddy, Mekong, all flow from Tibet. Ramu River to Nepal, all flow from Tibet. 1.4 billion people of Asia depend on water flowing from Tibet. Now, if you let China utilize, they can say we have sovereign control over Tibet, and we can use our water any way we want, and we can divert it any way we want because we have not signed. We have even not signed the UN Convention on Water Sharing. What can India do? But if you say Tibet as a buffer zone, as a zone of peace, Tibetan as the guardian of the Tibetan plateau should have some say on how the Tibetan plateau is administered, how the water is shared or not. Ultimately, Tibetans should have a say on this as well. Because, and in India also, if you want to build something in a village, you consult the villagers. Even though the project might be beneficial to villagers, you consult the villagers and say, what is your take on this? Do you oppose or not? And with their consent, with their support, you implement the project. Similarly, water tower of Asia, that's where Tibetan people live. And Tibetans must have a say on how you function or administer the Tibetan plateau. Hence, restoring the stewardship or the guardianship of the Tibetan plateau to the Tibetan people is also very important. And if you do that, then there will be some semblance of sanity. Otherwise, at the moment, it's one way. Beijing to Delhi, Beijing to Lhasa. And finally, I'll end with one belt, one road. It's the biggest thing that's going on. We have been a witness to that because we lost our country because of one road. So whenever one belt, one road is mentioned, we are terrified. All the nightmares comes back. Because the Chinese army, Red Army, promises one road. They said it would bring peace and prosperity. And the Tibetans helped them build road. As Ram Motherji rightly said, their strategy has always been deception. So they said, we will build this road, it will bring peace and prosperity to Tibet and Tibetan people. And our parents and grandparents were so happy to build roads, they were paid silver coins. And Tibetans composed a song called Chinese communists are like our parents. When they come, they shower you with silver coins. And Mao Zedong and Chinese government directed that silver coin factories be built near Chengdu. They literally built several factories to manufacture silver coins to supply to Tibet because they knew it will come back. Pay. And Tibetans built the road. Once the road was completed, trucks came, tanks came, guns came, we got our country occupied. By the time we realized that some of the ruling elite was co-opted. Now it's called consultant, right, to ministers who are paid. We didn't know some of a few aristocrats also become consultant to Communist Party because they were paid golds. Gold coins were paid to them. And there were entertainment centers were built. So I was giving a talk in Mysore University and two African students asked me, what do you make of all the Chinese investment in the continent? And I said, did they build good roads? They said yes. Did they build big entertainment centers? They said yes. Did they co-opt your leaders? They said yes. They said, how do you know about Africa? I said, it happened to us 60 years ago. Same blueprint is used even today. And it's working. So in that sense, Tibet is the key to unravel the deception, the strategy, and the execution. In that sense, Tibet could be the catalyst to push back on China. Hence, Emil Sondhi's prophetic stand that Tibet should be the core issue between India and China is right. And rightfully so. Now let me end with this. 98% of Tibetan monasteries and nunneries were destroyed in Tibet in 1950s and 60s. 99.9% of monks and nuns were disrobed in Tibet. Mao Zedong thought, we have destroyed the foundation of Tibetan civilization. Tibet looks like China. Tibet looks like Chinese. Done deal. But after 60 years, what happened? Buddhism is back in Tibet. Buddhism is back in exile. Buddhism is back in Himalayan region. Buddhism has spread because of His Holiness Dalai Lama to all the Western countries. And China has become oddly the largest Buddhist country in the world. 300 million Chinese Buddhists. Hence, Chinese leaders are a bit nervous about His Holiness returning to China because he will have more members, 300 million members, than 82 million Communist Party members. So hence, Tibet could be a catalyst. Buddhism could be a catalyst. Because when you have 300 million members, well, you have more members than Communist Party of China. So let me conclude by saying this. So, China, again, China is trying to transform the world. Either we transform China or you get transformed. But there is an opportunity. China is not this linear the linear progression, a one-way street coming all the way. A lot of things are happening inside China also. China is historically, traditionally a Confucius country. Then they adopted Marxism. Then they adopted market economy. Now Christianity is there. Buddhism is there. So meaning the Confucian guy is there. Karl Marx is there in one room, same room. Adam Smith is there. And Jesus Christ is also there. And Buddha is also there. This is China. They are talking about each other. What to do. Which direction should China go? And Mr. Buddha is saying, hey, I have 300 million members, so I must have a final say. So if Mr. Buddha have a say, he will invite Miss Democracy to China. And if China becomes a Buddhist-based democracy, That's Dalai Lama's version of Buddhist-based democracy, which everybody accepts is more inclusive, more benign, more gentle. If that happens to China, and peace will prevail in China, in Tibet, and the whole of Asia and the whole world. So we should not, I think the choice is very clear. Should we transform China or not? And we can. There are forces within China. That's happening. That's changing China. All we need to do is, instead of having Denmark and Norway unilateral stand on China, there must be a multilateral coordinated stand on China. India and allies should stand together on China and take it to the United Nations. That's what Emil Sondhi said. Take it to international forum and make Tibet as the linchpin of this issue, of this pushback. And if you do that, then suddenly Tibet holds the key to Beijing in changing Beijing as well. And so far, and it has been other way around, and I hope there's, instead of one-way street, there's another way going back to Beijing, and Tibet will be the lion that we all will ride and challenge the dragon. Thank you. Oh, I was told if there are some questions to any of the panelists, including me, I'm supposed to answer. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I was.